Hello, welcome back to First Chapter Friday from the Alameda Free Library. Today I'm going to be reading the first two chapters of The Insiders by Mark Oshiro. And this book is published by Harper, or HarperCollins Publishers. The chapters are a little short to begin with, so let's start with chapters 1 and 2, and then we'll read a little bit from the front cover to see if this book will be what you want to read next. Chapter 1. Hector Munoz glittered. Literally, his mommy glanced over at him from the driver's seat and smiled. "You're going all out, aren't you?" she said. "I have to," he said, smoothing out the wrinkles on his black button-down. "First day and all, gotta let them know what they're in for." She turned the car onto the wide stretch of Madison Avenue. The streets were so much bigger here than anything he was used to back home in San Francisco. Well, not home anymore. It hadn't been long since his family had moved to Orangevale, which was definitely not San Francisco. He fell silent as his mother drove him to school. He wasn't going to tell her how fast his heart was beating or that he missed his friends, that he missed being able to walk through the Mission to school in the morning, that he missed the corner market off Valencia where the man behind the counter always joked about Hector being too young for coffee. So he fiddled with the tiny stuffed Evie on his backpack. He zoned out while staring at all the strip malls and gas stations and drive-through restaurants as they passed by. He flicked the tiny bells he had sewn into the top strap of his bag. "You'll be fine, mijo," his mommy said as they slowed behind traffic. When he glanced up at her, her eyebrows were raised in concern. "You just be your wonderful self, and it'll all be okay." "You think so?" "Depends on if your new classmates have any taste," she said in a faux serious tone. "You might just be too cool for them." He laughed. "Oh, come on, Mommy. You think that's true?" She grunted. "Honey, the buttons on your shirt match the buttons on your shoes." "True. And yesterday morning we saw a man wearing a cargo vest at the store." He nodded. "Also true. I did not know a person could need so many pockets." Mommy turned off Madison toward the school. "What do you think he keeps in them?" "Duh, Mommy, his hopes and dreams." They both laughed at that, and Hector was thankful he could joke as often as he did with Mommy. He relied on humor a lot because it just made everything fun. He looked more like his Poppy than his Mommy. She was a lighter brown, and her nose came to a point, and her face was framed with long black hair. Hector had the black curls, the dark brown skin, and the wide nose of his Poppy. But he got his jokes from Mommy, definitely. He hoped that his humor would get him through this day, because there it loomed, off to the right and at the end of the block, Orangevale Middle School. It was a single story, sprawling. The green grass of the sports field stretched so far back that Hector couldn't even see the fence on the other side of campus. Did it go on forever? Probably. Everything seemed to in this town. Long streets, an endless horizon, so much space. There were no buildings leaning up against one another, no growing and diving hills with homes that seemed like they were riding the wave of the earth. Other kids were streaming up the steps into the school, and he took a deep breath. "I can do this," he said, almost to himself. But his mommy heard him. "I know you can," she said. And then she reached over and grabbed his hand. "You're amazing, mijo. You're going to make so many friends, and everyone is going to love you." "They better," he said, grinning. "I put on my best outfit for them." "Go impress them," she said, then kissed him on the forehead. "Be the Hector I know and love." "It's a new stage," he said, "and this is opening night." "That's a neat way to think of it," said Mommy. "You going to join the drama club today?" "If I can find it," he said as he opened the car door and jumped out. "Poppy is picking me up, right?" She nodded, and Hector blew her a kiss. He shut the door. She drove off. And then it was time. Hector Munoz stood at the bottom steps, kids streaming around him into the wide-open double doors. So, this was his new school. It felt even stranger that this first day here was at the beginning of October, too. No matter, he had to make a good impression. So he joined the flow, and moments later he was inside his new school. The halls were bright, the tiles shiny, and the echoes echoes of voices and scuffling shoes bounced around him. The energy felt different. It wasn't as loud here as his last school. No one was reciting a monologue in the hallway or singing or practicing a synchronized dance routine. There weren't any kids running with a giant canvas hoisted on their back. As he counted 6 kids wearing green cargo shorts, he deeply missed Tim and Sophia, his best friends back in the mission. I'll have to text them, he thought, and he pulled out his phone. No phones in the halls! The voice rang loud and clear just off to Hector's left, and he froze in place long enough for someone to bump into his backpack. Out of the way, the girl whispered, and she looked over Hector from head to toe, then shook her head, her blonde curls bouncing back and forth. Seriously? He thought. Did she just judge my outfit? But he had no time to say anything. A woman stood tall in front of Hector, her arms crossed in front of her, and she wore a head-to-toe gray outfit. Gray skirt, gray blazer over a gray shirt, and a gray cloth headband pulling her brown hair back, with impeccably shined gym sneakers on her feet. Everything was perfectly matched. Young man, did you hear what I said? Hector did, but he was still lost in all that gray. There was so much of it. Did she dress this way every day? He kind of respected that. Sorry, he said, putting his phone back in his pocket. I'm new here. She raised a brow high on her angular face, which only seemed to stretch it longer. New? She said. Did you already go through registration? Last week, he said. Mommy brought me to... Because there is an order to things here at Orangevale Middle School, she said, cutting Hector off. You can't just do as you please, young man. Oh, okay, he frowned. I wasn't trying to. Did you read our handbook on student conduct? Seemingly out of nowhere, she produced a pale pamphlet, and held it out. Perhaps you need a refresher. He shook his head. No, I think I'm fine, Ms. Heath, head of campus security, she said, raising her chin higher. And what's your name? Hector Munoz, he said, beaming up at her. There was a notepad in her hand. Where did that come from, he wondered. Where did the pamphlet go? She scribbled something down. She muttered. Well, off to homeroom. You do know where that is, right? What did you write? Mr. Munoz, that is none of your business, she intoned, her voice dropping in pitch. Please continue to class, and remember, here at Orangevale Middle School, we follow the rules. Then she turned and walked off, down the hallway, her gym shoes squawking loudly on the tile. Well, that was odd, he thought. Why had she just singled him out? Sure, he was new. Still, it wasn't the best start to his first day. Bell rang out. A bell rang out. It was flat, an even tone, low and boring. Miss Heath was still walking away, so he peeked at his phone. His homeroom class started in 5, and after that, he'd meet all his new teachers, all his new classmates. Maybe there'd be a kid obsessed with musicals, or even someone who just liked drama. At this point, he'd take someone who had visited a thrift shop once in their life. He just had to find his people, right? Hector stepped into his noisy homeroom class, believing that it could only get better. Chapter 2. Well, Hector thought, this was worse. He stood with a yellow plastic tray in his hands just beyond the end of the cafeteria line. He was ignoring the food on the tray. He wasn't even sure it was meat in the breaded patty that limply sat in one of the squares. His focus was on the long expanse of tables before him. Hector had only attended one school since kindergarten, Alta Vista Academy. And you didn't have to worry about where to sit at lunch when you were 5. By that time, that sort of thing had mattered. Oh, let me start that one over. By the time that sort of thing had mattered. Hector found Tim and Sophia. He'd discovered musical theater. He knew where to go. So where did Hector belong here? This felt like one of those movies Mrs. Lopez used to show in her health sciences class, as if Hector was about to be taught an important lesson about friendship by an animated bird. At least that would be more helpful, he thought. He had no idea what he was doing. The table of jocks was closest. All the athletes flocked to one another like they were their own species. There was no way Hector would ever be caught there in his whole life. The cheerleaders would probably be nice to Hector, but that wasn't the right table either. There were the band geeks, their gear stuffed under the table in black hardshell cases. Hector internally sneered at them. It was silly, but there was a long-standing competition between band geeks and theater nerds. He was sure these kids were fine people, but it was the principle. Never, never shall the two be friends. So not true. A group of gamers were huddled around a switch, but as Hector watched, Ms. Heath swooped in like a hawk and confiscated it. As the kids at the table groaned loudly, the mean kids at the next table over took advantage of the noise to continue making videos on their phones or showing each other whatever new meme they found online. Clearly, they were much better at hiding their devices from Ms. Heath. They still weren't right for Hector. He passed each table and observed for a moment or two, hoping that he'd see something familiar. Kids practicing their lines, impromptu fashion shows, harmonizing sing-alongs, but there was nothing of the sort. His heart raced as he passed by the comic book nerds, and then that was it. Hector was at the back of the cafeteria, and there was only one option, a mostly empty table with just 5 kids sitting at it. 4 of them were huddled at one end of it, and then far at the other end, there was a lone kid with pale skin and dark hair and a skull t-shirt on. Hector recognized it as a Misfits t-shirt. It was kind of impossible to live in the Bay and not know who they were. The kids closest to him glanced up and examined Hector head to toe. Then a black kid on the end, thick framed glasses on his face, nudged the brown-skinned girl in a hijab next to him. They scooted over and Hector decided to take a chance. Where else was he going to sit? He plopped his tray down. "Hi," he said. "Hector." The boy with the glasses smiled at him. "Jackson," he said. "Well, my first name is Jeremy, but I go by Jackson." Then he pointed across the table. "That's Carmen." Carmen waved. She was brown, slightly lighter in complexion than Hector's deep brown, and he really liked how she did her makeup, with sharp eyeliner and red lip gloss. "That's Taylor." Taylor was abnormally tall and had dirty blonde hair, and he looked just like a surfer down to his sunburned white face. He flashed Hector a peace sign. "I'm Aisha," announced the girl in the hijab. "Welcome to Table of Misfits." Hector laughed at first, then saw no one else was laughing. "Oh, you're serious?" "We are," said Jackson, and not just because of him. He gestured with his head to the far end of the table. "What's that kid's deal?" asked Hector. "That's Pat," explained Carmen. "He doesn't want to be friends with anyone." Hector let loose a chuckle, but cut it short when once again he was the only one reacting that way. "Oh, really?" Aisha nodded. He literally announced it during lunch on the first day of school. He stood up on the table and just yelled at all of us. "Said that we were all beneath him and that none of us were worth the time," Jackson added. "Wow," said Hector. "So this is his table then? Table of Misfits?" "Well, also none of us fit in anywhere else, bro," said Taylor. His drawl was absolutely that of a surfer. "Like, I don't know if you know this about me since you're new and all, but like, I surf, bro." "Really?" Hector said, his voice shaking as he struggled to keep a smile off his face. "I couldn't tell." "Totally," said Taylor. "And I don't know if you know this either, but there's no ocean here in Orangevale." Hector glanced over at Carmen, who had her face in her hands and was shaking her head. "Yeah, right, of course," said Hector. "We're so far inland." Taylor's mouth dropped open. "Bro, we are." There was silence at the table as all of them stared at Taylor. "He is a special person," thought Hector. "Anyway," said Aisha, "Taylor isn't wrong. I'm the black Muslim girl into art, and all the art kids think I'm pretentious." "I'm starting a makeup history channel on YouTube," said Carmen. Then her voice dropped. "When I turn 13 next year. My mom won't let me make videos yet, so the mean kids don't want me to sit with them." "And I'm the band kid who doesn't fit in with the other band kids," said Jackson. Hector heard a thump under the table, and he looked down at the hard trumpet case at Jackson's feet. That was a surprise to him. "What do you mean you don't fit in?" I listen to a lot of reggae and first wave ska, said Jackson, his face lighting up. Like the real early stuff. Everyone else, well, they just want to compete, but I just want to get better at the trumpet and start a band, maybe bring about a new wave of ska. I wouldn't have guessed you were a band geek, Hector said quietly. They're not like you back at my old school in San Francisco. And that was true. The band kids Hector had known didn't seem to know any modern music aside from the covers they performed at school events. He wanted to ask Jackson about music, but Carmen changed the subject. Wait, you're from the city? Exclaimed Carmen. And you ended up here? Hector poked at the food on his tray. I mean, yeah, my mommy got a big teaching job here, so we just moved. Well, maybe you belong here with us, said Aisha. You can definitely sit here every day, she paused. If you want, of course. He smiled back at her. Yeah, cool, he said, and he tried the weird breaded patty. Oh, he should not have done that. His stomach rumbled as the others fell back into another conversation. Hector tried to keep up, but he didn't know what they were talking about half the time. Still, he felt a warmth in his chest when Jackson said that he hoped to see Hector again at lunch the next day. It's a start, thought Hector. And that's the end of chapters 1 and 2 of The Insiders by Mark Oshiro. And here's a little blurb from the front cover. Back home in San Francisco, being gay didn't mean feeling different. But at his new school in Orangevale, Hector Munoz stands out like a sore thumb in a sea of sameness. And Mike, the school bully, makes sure Hector knows it. Most days, Hector resorts to hiding in the janitor's closet, but one day, when the door closes behind him, Hector finds a room suddenly filled with everything his heart desires. A couch, video games, and even his abuela's famous horchata. As if that weren't bewildering enough, 2 other kids soon appear in Hector's unlikely hideaway. Juliana and Sal live in different corners of the country, and they each found the room for their own reasons. Now, as they learn more about the impossible place that's brought them together, these 3 outsiders will open the door to a life-changing year of adventure, friendship, and just a little bit of magic. Can't wait to read the rest. Find this from the Alameda Free Library, and see you next time on First Chapter Friday.